for having me.
Now I'd like to take this time to introduce you to Mr. Brant.
Hi, thank you for having. Appreciate the time here. So the title of my talk is Disruption Poetry, and I, can't ignore the amount of disruption that's going on in our world right now, and I think entrepreneurialism is very much tied to that, and will be. It'll be interesting to hear your perspective, and also to. I want you to think about sort of the uncertainty that is in the world today, and the role that you can play in dealing with uncertainty. So I come from the startup world. I lived through the dot-com boom and bust, which was the late 90s, and then the early 2000s is when the big, one of the big crashes happened. And after that crash, there were a number of people that were thinking about, why do we try to build new companies and startups to make them look like big companies? And we could look back and say, the successful startups don't do that. They act differently. And so during the 2000s, there were a number of different voices and different people trying to figure out, well, how do we codify? How can we teach this different way of working? And I was part of that group, and have written several books now on it. And really, I thought it was just for startups. I thought it was just for, maybe tech companies that were in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, and they wanted to change the world. And so these techniques were specific to them. And really, in the 10 years plus since then, I've come around to believing that this entrepreneurial way of working is for wherever we face uncertainty, with respect to the uncertainty that we have some control over. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But so this is all going to seem very obvious to you all, but I teach entrepreneurial spirit to large enterprises now, and people are still grappling with the fact that our world moves so incredibly fast now. It was not always this way. It's digital transformation. It has a lot to do with this. People say all the time, right, that the world is smaller, and it's really because of the speed of information and knowledge and data that circles around the world instantaneously. And it means that people can make decisions quickly, and that different parts of the world are completely automated. And so they all go as fast as the internet does. And it's just getting even faster. And so that's a phenomena in the world. Competition is more fierce than it's been maybe in the history of humankind. Globalization, the fact that startups can reach any corner of the world. We've got huge tech companies, and the way it stands right at the moment, we're not really enforcing antitrust or sort of the rules of capitalism. And that means, who knows what Google's going to get into next, or Amazon's going to get into next, or Facebook. So we have these huge tech companies that are just gobbling up different parts and competing in crazy ways. Huge corporations are doing more and more startup and entrepreneurial things, and moving into markets that they weren't into before. And of course, then you have the startup world. You have all of the entrepreneurs who are seeing new ways of solving old problems. And so the competition is absolutely fierce. The fact that university programs teach entrepreneurialism now is an extraordinary fact. Business school used to be, how do you manage these old school companies, and the 4 Ps of marketing, and really sort of this last century type of stuff. And now your college, University of Maryland, and is one of the leading colleges in terms of teaching, Steve Blank processes and, how to get going with the least amount of cost and learning from their customers. So it's entrepreneurs are all over the world. I travel the world. I'm lucky enough that I get to travel the world. This entrepreneurialism that you feel around you is in every corner of the world. And in the end, what also is the case then is that our customers are super agile. And what I mean by that is that customers can change their mind overnight. They've got so much information. They've got access to so much knowledge. There's social media, there's review websites, the digital media, reviewing products. We understand what the warts and the benefits and the failures of companies almost instantaneously. And we just don't live in the days anymore where a brand could stand on the mountain with a megaphone and say, this is who we are, and customers made choices between those. It's now that the customer owns 50% of your brand, because a brand is really not the artifacts that create the image of a company. The brand is the relationship between a company and its customers, and that relationship has to be built upon trust and about value being created, or else the customer leaves and they can just go to somebody else that's willing to do that. And that creates opportunities for new entrepreneurs. But it also means that they themselves have to be able to establish these relationships in order to keep their customers. And it's true even selling into businesses. So the startups that I was at back in the day often sold into IT departments of large companies. And back in those days, if you successfully sold into IT departments, then you were good to go for a decade. And it's not the case anymore. IT systems are now architected in very modular ways so that you can push one vendor out and bring another in. And so those customers are agile as well. We can no longer just comfortably with our existing customers. It's constantly under threat. So we have to be able to understand and create value for those customers. Generally, the world is just a more complex place. We live in a networked world. Again, I think that you all understand this because you've grown up in this world. But it used to be, way more linear world, and we could understand the context that we were operating in. But we're still hardwired with brains that are used to living in small villages, and yet we have this global information, and we're and the speed of that knowledge means that us as individuals cannot hold the context anymore. And so we have to form teams in order to understand the context of problems that we're trying to solve and how we're going to solve those problems, and the solutions to those problems requires this more contextual view. And it means that we have to work in these teams oriented rather than as individuals, which is an interesting and relatively new phenomena at the scale that it is now. So all of this is with the backdrop that our very systems, structure, processes of our major industries, government, education, and other institutions is based upon still the industrial age. They are better represented from a model perspective. They're better represented by an assembly line than they are by this networked world that we actually live in. So all of that's going to change. The very structure, systems, processes, how we organize work, how we organize companies, how we organize education is going to change, in my opinion, to reflect the new networked digital world that we live in. This is one of the reasons why there is so much turmoil, because we are going through massive change and we're in the middle of it, and we can't see where we were and we can't see where we're going. And and it causes a tremendous amount of volatility and a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And uncertainty and volatility cause fear, and fear causes people to act in irrational ways, but it's also to grasp what they know and what they understand, because that's where they feel safe. So there's a myth that entrepreneurs gravitate towards risk, that they like risk, and it's not really the case. Entrepreneurs mitigate risk. They actually dislike risk more than the average bear, and so they actually do something about it. They mitigate that risk by behaving differently in the face of uncertainty. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I show this slide because last November, I was doing a presentation in Rotterdam, and I was talking to innovation executives in large companies. And I was telling them, I say, hey, listen, I think there's a recession coming. Winter is coming. You guys need to think about your behavior and change some behavior in order to demonstrate an impact that you can have on your companies, or your budgets are going to get cut. I had no idea what was coming. I did not predict a winter like we've had. But I think it drives the point home, the point of living within uncertainty and having to operate and think differently in the face of uncertainty. And so that's what we are facing to an incredible degree today. And those of you who believe you're entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs, who embrace the entrepreneurial spirit, are really the people that we need to lead dealing with uncertainty. And it's not because you like uncertainty or because you like risk. It's because you understand sort of innately, or have learned, or some combination, how to deal with it. And the vast majority of people don't know how to deal with uncertainty. So here we are, the world is closed, thinking about opening back up, starting to open back up, but it's changed, it's different. And so when I'm talking to these large corporations, and they've got their workforce that's working at home, and they, again, they're faced with not knowing what's happening. Their tendency is to, what I hear over and over is they got to buckle down. And by buckle down, they mean they have to go back into what's called execution mode. In other words, they're just going to go do what they understand how to do. But what happens if you do what you understand what you should be doing 6 months ago? If you go back to that and the world has changed, then you're likely to fail. So executing in the face of uncertainty, doing what we understand in the face of uncertainty, leads to failure. So when we talk to large companies, we talk about this difference between knowing and unknowing. And large companies on the left work in the known side. They became large and successful because they understood markets deeply. And they learned how to market, sell, create products, improve products, distribute, build a supply chain, how to manufacture. They learned how to do all of that inside of these known markets, and succeeded at exploiting what they knew and building a large successful business with billions of dollars in revenue. Startups, entrepreneurs typically are on the other side. They're on the unknown side. You maybe have a great idea. You maybe think that you understand the market well. In the old days, and hopefully you don't have to do this anymore, you had to write business plans, pages and pages of a document is essentially describing assumptions, describing what one thinks that they know, but they don't really know because the market is the one that determines the reality, not what we think in our minds. And so that's where the startups live, is over in this unknown side. But this is not binary. This is not, you don't live on the unknown and then you suddenly are in the known side, right? It's a continuum. And so the amount of uncertainty, massive on the unknown, on the startup side, but the uncertainty still exists over on the big company side. It's smaller amounts of uncertainty, but there's still uncertainty there. And this idea that you can only work in this execution or exploit mode over on the big company side it doesn't work. It's false. We have to be able to work differently. And this is, again, this is sort of where the pandemic and is really brings home the fact that we have this uncertainty even on the big company, on the execution side. And so suddenly they're faced with lots of uncertainty, even though they're just trying to get done what they are always trying to get done. It's not even, quote, innovation. It's merely, how do I hit my numbers? How do I create the revenues that we're promising to Wall Street? Where are we going to go next year? What do our customers need? What has changed about our customers over the last 6 months? So there's 5 elements that I talk about with respect to this changing world that we live in. And these are the practices that we need to be able to apply. So that's empathy, 1. So how do we understand our customers or even just stakeholders? How do we understand them deeply? It's not about going and asking your customers what they want and doing what they say. The solution is up to you. It's asking customers, or it's understanding why those customers are saying what they say. It's understanding why they are asking for particular things. It's going deeply and trying to understand their needs and their aspirations. What are they trying to accomplish? What's the impact it'll have on their life if they actually successfully have their needs addressed? What is the environment that they're in? The second E is experiments. So how do I run purpose-built experiments that validate or invalidate assumptions I have about my idea? And the third is evidence. How do I use the data that I glean, or the data that I develop from the experiments and the insights I glean? How do I use those to help me make decisions that cut through my biases, cut through that really difficult part of maybe understanding that my ideas aren't the best in the world? How do I move on from that? And then there's ethics. And so if we're learning deeply about our customers, we have to be responsible in how we use that information. We're not trying to capitalize or leverage it in ways that are not appropriate. We want to be focused on creating value for people. And the last, execution, is about balancing that search and exploit mode. So I talked about how uncertainty is a continuum. So if you start on the startup side, you're full of unknown, but your whole job is to create that roadmap, create that blueprint that allows you to grow and be successful. So that means that you're figuring out all of those items that you have in the unknown bucket. You have to move those over into the known bucket, and then you execute on them. And so over time, we start to balance how much learning mode we're doing versus how much execution mode. But we always need some combination of both. The way I teach entrepreneurialism is a combination of design thinking, agile, and lean startup. So I'm guessing you've probably heard of at least 2, maybe 3 out of those buzzwords, but I'll dive into them a little bit. But again, the combination of these elements is really up to you, and depends on your business and your customers and what feels right to you. Eventually, you need to come up with what your own method is, what your own style of entrepreneurialism is. But these are all based upon some pretty fundamental principles, and it's really trying to get entrepreneurs to adopt the specific principles, and then let you all define what the actual practices are. So let's dive a little bit into the empathy part. So empathy is not just going and asking, again, it's not asking customers what they want and doing what they say. It's not just trying features for your product. So it's super important that what you're not asking your customers to predict their own future. You go and you talk to your customers about what they're doing now. You can talk to them about what's done in the past, but you don't want to be pitching them your solution, and you don't want to be asking them to, will you do X, or will you pay for this, or how much will you pay? Customers are horrible at predicting their own future. Have you ever not bought an iPhone app? I mean, they're 99 cents. Trying to get a person to predict whether they're going to spend 99 cents. How many people, if you ask them if they would pay 99 cents for something, would say no? But the moment it's in the context of the App Store, they're like, no way would I pay 99 cents for that. I'm sure you can think of some other examples of times when you've experienced other people, or you yourself have experienced that you didn't behave in the way that you predicted you would have behaved. So asking customers to do that is really kind of a waste of time. And it's why we try to understand them deeply. We try to get down to an emotional level. We're trying to figure out, we want to observe them even. Now, this is a lot more difficult to do with the pandemic, but people are becoming more and more comfortable with video, so you can do all sorts of tactics to try to get people to share more deeply about what their needs are and what their aspirations are. So this is sort of a famous example of a pharmaceutical company is asking their customers whether they have any problems getting the top off of their pill bottles. So those darn childproof caps, right? So they asked this elderly woman, whether she was having any problems, and she goes, "No, I don't have any problems." And they, "Oh, well, show us how you get the top off." And this woman literally brings them over to a meat slicer, and this is how she's getting the top off of her pill bottles. Now, I'm guessing this is not the user experience they were going for. But think about this for a second. You can't get this from an interview. You can't get this from a survey. You can't get this from a focus group. You actually have to be and able to go to the source, to watch them within the context of the problem that you're trying to solve, in the context of your product idea. You observe them. Can you just hang out with them for a day, for 2 weeks? Design thinking type of tactics where you give people a video camera or have them journal the day in their life on their iPhone, or taking pictures. See if you can set up a camera that just sort of films the environment that you're trying to address. There's a startup that I was mentoring that spent 2 weeks inside of a large company just observing their hiring practices, their HR managers and the hiring managers, or the HR people and the hiring managers. So it's just really up to your creativity, and you can learn interviewing techniques in order to get your customers, your potential customers, to go more deeply into what they're trying to accomplish. And again, in the end, it's up to you to come up with the solution. You come up with the way of solving the need, but it's understanding that need deeply that will differentiate you from others in the marketplace. So experiments. The idea of the experiments is to go bold. So you maybe have heard of split testing. So there's a lot of digital tests that one can do that they're all fine and good. Split testing is specifically, putting up 2 versions of a website and measuring which one customers convert on. So that's great. But again, there's sort of this low-hanging fruit that you can do with experiments. And what I want people to do is to think of, how do you go bold? So if you think about your idea, you can start with, what does the customer have to do, like literally with your product? What is their behavior that they must do in order to extract the value that you're promising them they'll get? So if I was YouTube, it might be like, you got to create a video, upload a video, and share it with 25 of your friends. Okay, so if you're YouTube, maybe you say like an engaged customer is one who does that 2 times a week. Just a hypothesis. It just starts off as a hypothesis. And then an experiment that you can run is, well, I went to a farmer's market and I just went up to random people and I asked them if they would post a review of their favorite booth at the farmer's market. So I'm trying to get them to exhibit a behavior that is analogous to the product I want to build. And that behavior validates or invalidates one of the riskiest assumptions. Will people actually shoot videos of themselves and upload it onto the internet and share it with their friends? Well, we know that now, but think about whatever your product idea is, your customer has to behave in a particular way for your product to be successful. So what can I do today to get them to perform some analogous behavior that gives me confidence that this product might actually work? Whenever we're trying to sell products or services to customers, we're basically asking them to change their behavior, right? They have to do something differently than what they're doing today. So an experiment is a way for me to try to get them to do some sort of a behavior, some sort of a change in behavior that indicates to me that I should take the next step in my startup. So these are experiments my company has run out in the wild with corporate customers. So believe me, if corporations can do this, you can do this. So the picture over on the left is a surgeon holding her hands in this box prototype hand atomizer that would sanitize the surgeon's hands without her having to, go to the sink and wash her hands. So the riskiest behavior that they came up with, this team came up with, was that they felt like surgeons would not stand there with their hands in this box for 30 seconds. And so they went to the hospital with this prototype. And in this particular, looks like a meeting room, a break room, the doctors would come and stand with their hands in the box for 30 seconds. And 29 out of 30 or 19 out of 20 were willing to do it. So 19 out of 20 of these surgeons behaved in a way that indicated to this team that they should take whatever they felt the next step was, that assumption had been validated, that they would be willing to do that. The middle picture is a large company HR team. They're trying to measure whether they could get employees to eat more healthily. And so they've got 2 different snack bags there. One is labeled junk food snacks. One is labeled healthy snacks. And they would measure which one the employees would take. And then inside the healthy snacks, they put junk food, and inside the junk food, they put healthy. And then they would measure whether the people would still eat them, despite what they said. The example on the right is a virtual reality company that's measuring whether employees would wear goggles inside of a cubicle at work. So they were just trying to measure that social part of wearing goggles in public, I guess. But nobody put those cardboard ones on. But when they got real goggles, everybody did. So the idea here that I'm trying to get you to think about is the behavior part of it. What is the behavior that indicates that a particular assumption is true? And if I don't see that behavior, that assumption is false. And I maybe need to change something fundamentally about my idea. So when I talk about agile, so the empathy portion I was talking about is really design thinking tactics, and the experiment is really around the lean startup portion of it. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with Agile. Agile is originally developed as a software way of working. So you can Google the Agile Manifesto. Everybody should read it. I believe. I think Agile is going to form the way companies are structured going forward. We're already seeing a lot of this. So in large corporations and in a lot of startups, the engineering group is already Agile at some level. Sometimes they don't adhere to the principles of the manifesto, which I think is a mistake. And so changes will happen further there. But the way I describe Agile is basically you're working in this team and you've got your heads down, you're working on your project, your product, or maybe you're working on marketing. It doesn't matter. Think about any sort of thing a company has to be working on. It could be customer development or interviewing customers or whatever. How often should that team be lifting their heads up and receiving new information from outside that team? So new information from other teams, new information from company executives that are talking about the state of the company, information from the economy, information from anything that's happening in the world that might affect that team. And that team gets to make the decision: do we need to change our plans? Do we need to change what we're working on based upon that new information? And oftentimes the answer will be no, they don't need to change. But the cadence of how often you lift your heads up to get that new information, it's called a sprint. And it does not have to be defined by, most software companies define it as 1 or 2 weeks. The idea is that we've got this regular and sort of this average unit of work. So if we're writing code, software code, we might churn out a couple of features a day. And so you're going to meet more often. But if you're working on complicated hardware, then it could be that an average unit of work is several days or a week or a month. And so then, the amount of time that you have to meet is less important because there's nothing that you really can fundamentally change. And so those two things determine the sprint length. But the other important parts of being agile is that the team itself gets to decide how they're going to solve a problem. And so they're self-organized. They're given a metric that measures the progress that the team's making. And the metrics, frankly, are one of the most difficult parts about startups and about projects, is determining those right metrics. The teams need to be transparent with each other, but also then share their context with the other teams. So I mentioned earlier this need for context sharing so that we can all understand what's the larger goal and larger objective that we're working on. And then these agile methods are another way that we can also do that balance that I was talking about between those tasks that we know we have to go execute on and where do we need to continue to do the learning tasks. So in my book, The Lean Entrepreneur, I introduced this framework, which is called the Value Stream Discovery Tool. And basically, it's a way to think through 7 states that a customer goes through from becoming aware to becoming passionate about a product. So you can imagine, if you think about any sort of product that you've experienced, you first become aware of the product and then you become interested in it because whatever messaging they've given you, you feel like it's speaking to you and it solves a problem that you have. Then you become trusting when you think that product is actually going to be able to solve whatever need you have. You become convinced, so you buy or you sign up. Excuse me. Then you go through a state where you're hopeful that you've made the right decision and that the product is actually going to work. You become satisfied when the promise that was made to you is fulfilled. So you continue to work with the product in a particular way over a particular period of time that indicates that you're satisfied. Or if it's a transactional product, it means that you maybe go buy another product, maybe the same one again, or maybe you go and buy a different product, but from the same company. And then there's this other state I call passionate, which it means that you've achieved some greater aspirational element, or you're on this journey towards achieving this greater aspiration that makes you more loyal and tied to that company. And that's sort of, to overcome that, the customer is more agile thing that I said at the beginning. So there's several elements of this stream, that sort of encompasses things that you learn about marketing funnels and sales funnels and really the business model, how we're going to, the price, how we're going to distribute, what other services or products might be necessary in order to fulfill the value to the customer. And hopefully getting to the point where passion means that customers are being your champions. They're out evangelizing your product. So essentially the passion, the behavior of passionate is that customers they put new customers into the top of your awareness funnel without you having to spend any money on marketing. And so for each one of these states, the idea is that for a particular market segment, you could define what you believe the behavior is that indicates what state a customer is at. So think about this as being a funnel. You have 1,000 people that hear about you, so they come in from the awareness, and then each state you're getting a certain percentage of those to move to the next state. And so what you do is you hypothesize, what is the behavior that indicates that a customer's at that state? What do I have to do as a business to get them to move to that state? How do I measure that? And therefore I can start figuring out what are the metrics that I need to achieve that indicate that I'm hitting those states for a particular market segment. And so in my view, this is how one should structure the company. So you don't structure based upon departments. And so you can see here that you've got those different domains of expertise. You've got a marketing domain and a sales domain and a product management domain and engineering, all of these other traditional departments. So it's important to have those vertical structures where people can improve their skills, but it's not the reporting mechanism. In other words, it's not how people's performance is measured. You're measured based upon the success of a team, and the team is cut horizontally across those different domains in order to construct a team that is best equipped to solving a particular mission, where a mission is, how do I improve the assigned metric for a particular state? So it could be that looking at my numbers, what I have to do is increase the number of customers that get to my satisfied state. Satisfied state might be what I mentioned earlier, say, the fictional YouTube example or video example. A satisfied customer is one who creates 2 new videos and shares it with 25 of their friends 2 times a week. So I'm measuring that. I'm measuring how many customers am I getting to that point. And I'm measuring whether people are dropping off of that. And the mission is, okay, I need a team to go and improve the number of people that are getting to that state and improve the retention. So improve the number of people that are staying at that state. And so I form a team based upon the resources that I have. I form a team and say, okay, you got to go move that metric or those metrics. The team working in an agile fashion gets to determine how they're going to do that. And they're using those 5 E's that I'm talking about. They go and develop empathy so they can understand the different customers and why they're not getting dissatisfied, or those that are getting dissatisfied, what can I learn from them? I'm running experiments in order to try to get that number better. I'm using the evidence that I glean in order to determine what is going to be permanently put into the product. I use the agile methods to balance what I need to do as an execution arm and what do I need to do as a learning arm in order to make sure that those numbers stay good or get to the point that we're satisfied with those numbers. And my behavior is regulated by ethics. So I'm not doing whatever I can in order to get those numbers. I'm doing that within guidelines that our company has determined, and my personal beliefs as well, determine is an ethical way of getting people to those numbers. You could do that all across those 7 states. You can do it per market segment and per product as well. And this is actually even how then you would scale the company, is based upon a structure like that. Remember that a customer doesn't see a company based upon the departments that we've created inside the company. The customer perceives this as one journey. And so it makes way more sense to me to structure the company based upon that journey than on an assembly line. So we are seeing evidence of things that are similar. This is sort of my idea of how I would structure it. There's a bank in Europe, a very large bank, ING, that uses these lean innovation techniques, this entrepreneurial spirit, and is reorganizing their entire company based upon a similar model to this, around guilds is what they call their different vertical domain expertise, and then tribes are cut across the guilds in order to form teams that are going and improving some element of the business. So just to wrap up here, it's my core belief that in this digital world, with everything moving so fast and the amount of customers or amount of competition and how agile our customers are, that your chances of success are not based upon things like intellectual property. That's not going to be patent based like it was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you're doing a highly technical, artificial intelligence, and I'm sure that there's a lot of life sciences going on, and so patents are great and required and all that. But even in those domains, how deeply you understand your customers, the insights that you glean from your customers, is ultimately your business's competitive advantage. And there's so many people that are not willing to actually go and engage their customers in a meaningful way, that's your opportunity, is to go and do that. And if you are able to glean insights that your competition doesn't have, that puts you a step ahead. So thank you very much. Again, my name is Brant Cooper. I'm at brant@brantcooper.com or startupbluebook.com. And so I encourage you to reach out. I pretty much try to respond to everybody. So if you have questions that we don't get answered here, then that's all good. Please reach out. And I guess I'm going to stop sharing. And we'll go back and see if anybody has any questions or comments or anything else. Thank you.
So presently, I don't see any chat, so anyone raise their hand. So I would ask if each and every one can participate in our poll. We have a few questions. We'd like to get your feedback so we can be able to make this better for each and every one. So I'd appreciate if you all could take a minute and answer these short 5 questions. Thanks. While we wait to see if anyone would type in any questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand.
think we have 2 raised hands.
Yeah, just allow Hemi to talk. No, Piotr.
Oh, this is Piotr. Great presentation, great talk, thank you. Just wanted to make a remark and also get your reaction to something. I mean, I work here at the University of Maryland at the Tech Transfer Office. I deal with many university-based startups, spin-offs. Most often they are really ignited and started by our PIs, the principal investigators. Too often, they think that the primary source of advantage is intellectual property. We need to get this patent, right? Everybody probably knows about it. But I liked your comment to that extent, and especially juxtaposing the agile approach to designing product or service, because frankly, if you, I think, and I would like you to comment on that, whether you agree with my perspective, you know, agile, which is based on empathy, understanding of your customers, would probably allow a competitor to engineer around the IP that, you know, the spin-off, I think, is the primary source of competitive advantage. Thank you.
So you're asking whether, or you're making a comment that that it's a benefit of Agile because competitors might be engineering around the IP. Is that right?
So imagine 2 companies, right? Just that's whatever. One startup, the thinking and in that startup is our source of competitive advantage is our intellectual property, and it often may be the case, but they are like the weight is on, like, we have, you know, strong claims pending. This is source of our competitive advantage. Therefore, we don't have to worry that much about understanding our customers, empathy aspect of your framework, and so on and so forth. Like the second startup that is competing with the first one, I mean, on a theoretical level, the second startup puts weight on agile design based on understanding the customers, based on empathy, and so on and so forth. I would make an argument that the agile startup has a greater chance of success because the agile process that's based on customer input would allow them to engineer around the potential IP that the other startup has. But I guess that's my ad hoc theory.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would tend to completely agree with you. I mean, I think that so you know, I think that one of the characteristics of the last century was that I can actually weave the invention and innovation question in here as well. The inventions were absolutely extraordinary and sort of world-changing inventions. So I think that anybody that's doing a world-changing invention and so has a patent on that, I think they're gonna benefit, and at some level they're going to be successful eventually. So it's not going to happen right away, right? And so I think that our mindset tends to be around that world-changing invention as opposed to, you know, think about the graveyard of inventions that did not change the world and did not become successful. I mean, the numbers would be like insane in the sense that very, very few were successful and very, very infinitesimally small, I think. And so I think that that's even more so today. I think that there's multiple ways of doing problems. And I think that obviously the best answer is to have extraordinary invention and an agile design thinking mindset so that you can successfully bring that invention to market. Invention that's brought to market at scale is innovation. And so I think that I totally agree with you. I think that what's interesting is that even if the inventor, the one with the IP, eventually figures it out, they will have a harder time displacing the Agile team who has perhaps poorer technology, has perhaps a poorer solution to the problem from a purely technical point of view anyway, but understands the customer deeply and is doing whatever it needs to do in order to fulfill the promise for that customer and keeping the customer happy, right?
Yes.
And so I totally agree with you. And obviously, again, the best
It's a combination of the both, probably. but even, building on your comments about, pace of change today, which versus pace of change, 20, 30, 50 years ago. I mean, the famous beta versus VHS example, both had IP, right? But ultimately, VHS was better tuned towards customers, and there were other factors as well. But I mean, both have IP, but one is probably more agile on execution, on understanding customers, maybe simplicity, versus understanding that the quality is not that important if you juxtapose against the price and the simplicity, things like that. So I think the same challenge was existing in the past as it is now. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're true. It's true. I think that we've just come off of several decades of such extraordinary change that was been brought about, based upon invention and IP, that I think there's a lot of people whose minds are still sort of stuck in that, right? And so again, I think you're probably right. I think that oftentimes the sexier or the more celebrated in our media tends to be those huge changes, even though they probably still represent a small fraction of what was actually happening.
Yeah, I'll make one more comment because it figures something. So one could argue, even if you have a very good IP, but you're not agile and you're moving much slower than your competitor who is much more agile, and this competitor starts catching up and building, the user base, or people buy the products in quantities. This other competitor, more agile competitor, can basically acquire the slower mover who has better IP, and now it's the faster competitor, the agile competitor, has the best of both worlds.
Totally agree. And a matter of fact, maybe has the investment to do it as well, because they've already proven in the marketplace their ability to execute.
Yeah, and the conditions like you have to buy this company, right? Because they have IP, which is not a bad outcome for the first company as well. But in terms of scale, it's a different payout.
Yep, I totally agree. Thank you. Anybody else? So Alexandra asked in chat what the difference is between innovation and invention. So I tried to throw in the answer in that last discussion. So basically, invention really is that new technology that you get a patent for, and innovation is really when you've brought the value to the world, to the customers at scale, I think. So so I sort of love the example of Thomas Edison, because he's credited with inventing the light bulb. And a matter of fact, what startup organization or innovation organization doesn't use the light bulb as a symbol for, the eureka moment of invention? But Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. The patent existed prior to Thomas Edison's name. And what he did is actually, through experimentation, figured out the right filament to use that made the light bulb marketable, made it, so that it was providing value, and then helped create the market by going and figuring out the distribution of electricity and all these other components that were required for there to be a successful market. And so that, you know, the light bulb is sort of the invention. Lighted houses and a lighted world is really the innovation.
Hemi had a question. What is the difference between innovation and invention?
Yeah, I just answered that one.
Okay, right. There's no more questions here.
Okay.
Okay, if no one has any questions, I'd like to thank Mr. Brant for his time today and for sharing his knowledge. I learned a lot. I hope you all did as well. And feel free to join us on our next workshop. And thank you everyone for joining in.
All right. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Ala.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.